This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, no, it's fine. I just want to get the best angles, That's.
Hey, Charles.
How are you, Yahuda? I'm going to start out by just talking to you a bit about your background and your kind of where you are in terms of you're doing your media and whatnot. But let me just go live here on YouTube. And away we go. Welcome, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Thanks for joining me. And Doovid and I do this thing regularly on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, where we discuss pretty much Jewish issues as they intersect with American issues and Israel issues, politics and culture. And today we have Yahuda in studio with Doovid. Yahuda hosts a YouTube channel as well. So Yahuda, talk a little bit about what you're doing, your YouTube channel, your background, how it is you've gotten here.
Well, my background is multi-layered, like I do a lot of multimedia stuff. And actually I have two Hebrew names because my government name is Dishon, Dalit Shin Nun Sophie. It is written in the Chumash, but it's complicated, So I just took the short adjective Yahuda to keep it simple because my middle name is Marhal, which is also in the Talmud. But yeah, I'm a child of the downtown synagogue, when it was a lost place in Detroit. And the guys I grew up with were like you, Charles. Back in those days, it was like all the waterfront Jews, like from the old world. Like I had the privilege to grow up in that environment. So that's just one aspect of my background.
Nice. So sort of like all my old
on my channel, we've done about 10 streams and IRL events. So people who follow me on my channel are familiar. And he's finished one college degree I think in political science or broadcast journalism. Is actually about to finish his second degree. I forget if he finished his degree in broadcast journalism. The second one's in political science, or the other way around. He's a regular on Wayne State University radio. He's involved in music production, kind of entrepreneurial, flipping houses and different real estate professions, and conservative leaning. So, said like I'm part Cherokee Indian. I think Dishon also has a little bit of American Indian blood, and it's ironic, I thought it'd be interesting, why are Jews of color conservative leaning? Because we're the only real conservative
because it's
in Detroit.
It's a natural place for people of color to be generally, I think. But anyway.
Well, to start, the history of the Republican Party was a party of emancipation.
Exactly.
So I'm definitely a do for self person. My pet peeve, Charles, is mediocrity and complacency.
I'm glad to know that because the Democrats are the party of slavery and socialism.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, with my perspective on life, I'm more of a moderate, dead center, middle of the road. So I do keep an open mind, but for my own personal preferences, I want to keep the government out of my life as much as possible.
Yeah, of course you do, because we all have a natural distrust of big government. The whole idea of the American enterprise is to be sovereign under God, and government is there to protect that right and that sovereignty. And I think that's particularly true, and it's a natural understanding amongst people of color and younger people, actually. And I hope that grows.
Yes, where I was raised at in the particular synagogue was a mishmash. It was half Sephardic and half Ashkenazi. But it wasn't until later in my adulthood that I saw the whole concept of color consciousness come into play.
Yeah.
Because I was basically shielded from it because it was just not relevant. Because where I grew up was the original businessman synagogue for the city of Detroit. So everybody was about other things, mercantile culture, and pretty much everybody that was there from Syrian, Moroccan, Polish, Russian, all the ethnic backgrounds, the topic just never came up. And it was just something that was foreign to us. But lo and behold, when the city started to turn around, more people started to come in, then that's when I became aware of like the social dynamics of why, racial politics is such a big deal. Well, I always came from a background where financials were more important.
Absolutely, and self-sufficiency and faith. I know you grew up Jewish, but I would just note that the Black church has been a great moral force in this country, and I think it transformed the white church, frankly, because of its religious orientation, which I actually interviewed a professor a while back who did some sociological research, and he noted that the Black church in America goes back to the Puritans, and it's very Calvinist in many ways.
It was the Congregationalist movement.
Yes.
And as of recent, the Black church was very united with the Jewish community 50 years ago. But as of recent, certain relationships have eroded. And my perspective is that we have to get the wrong people out of power, because that's a historical, relevant, and traditional relationship.
Well, yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, Yahuda, because Black-Jewish relations go way back, and it's been kind of a symbiotic relationship because we're minorities, and we have a faith in God, and we have a social conscience, and I think in recent decades that has eroded. Why do you think that is, and what can we do to get it back on track, do you think?
Well, in my opinion, that relationship has eroded because, it's a culture of the hatred of rich people that sprang up out of nowhere. Like, people was very bitter because they see other people's success. And just historically speaking, it was a lot of Jewish merchants, Ashkenazic Jews, who helped slaves when the Underground Railroad was pretty prevalent. They gave them new outfits, and it was always some type of working because, the whole concept in Judaism is to always be an instrument of good and make this world a better place. And I'm not saying that generically, but that's what's written in all the books.
Yes.
You can go across the board.
Just to drop in,
Doovid?
Because of the technology, I actually can't hear you. I plugged the mic in, and so Deshaun has the earpiece.
Okay.
So I'm just going to let you talk with Deshaun. It's in my house, but I can't even hear you. I'll have to listen back later because I can't have the microphone in without the headpiece.
But you can't put on a pair of headphones. All right. All right, Doovid. Yahuda, did you grow up Jewish? Did you convert to Judaism? What's the story there?
Well, actually, my family, I do have a Cuban Sephardic background, but as of recent, with my gaining the knowledge of Judaism, traveling throughout the Jewish circles, I grew up conservative, conservadox. So basically, it's all a issue of validation. I can be a legal citizen of Israel if I was to move there tomorrow under the law of return. But at the same token, for other people that's in the community, you can never learn enough. And conversion is a tricky word because it's really no real conversion. It's a return to the original faith, like a ger.
Yes.
A ger exotic. It's two different definitions. You got a ger sha'ah, which is interpreted as a person that's just living within the greater Jewish community for whatever reason they're there. But I was very privileged in a way because I had strong rabbis and other influencers within the Jewish community that they were just so well beyond that basic dogma. My original rabbi was a Levite, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
And he was from Chicago, so he was very savvy in a lot of ways. And I grew up with Syrian Jews, and people that were big players in the Brooklyn Syrian community, and it's just never made any sense because people was always judged by what they did versus who they were or physically appeared to be. Until you actually did something, nobody would cast judgment. So that's just the model in life. And then my own mother wouldn't allow it in my house because where I'm from was an original, where she was born and raised before she moved to Detroit, was a historically Jewish community in Mount Clemens, Michigan. You know,
Oh, okay.
so she was the youngest of 8 children, and my grandmother was 100% Cuban. And it's just like they integrated early before it was socially acceptable and the law. So it was just never a part of my circle to be so racially polarized. It just was not what I'm into.
Yeah, no, and I want to talk about that in a minute. But before I get into that, there does seem to be somewhat of a movement amongst Black people, not so much even in the United States, but even in Africa, to embrace Judaism. I saw something about Nigerians becoming full Jewish congregants. I mean, and Israel sending rabbis to counsel them, and in Kenya and in Uganda and in other countries. And you also have a movement in Zimbabwe where you have people that are part of a particular tribe tracing their ancestry back to Solomon. And now you've got DNA evidence to prove that they were right, that they had always practiced elements of Judaism, maybe pre-Talmudic, and that they are Jews. And it's a fascinating thing to see. It's kind of an organic movement of return to the original, what Christians call the Old Testament, what we call the Torah. So I think that's amazing.
Well, originally it's a return because Judaism, before any other religion was organized, was prevalent. So, it depends what your philosophical viewpoint is. Around certain academic circles, like the African Americans that were taken in the slave trade, a lot of them historically had Jewish roots or may have been Jewish.
That's right.
When they were stamping out Judaism in the mainframe of Africa, and I don't want to point fingers and call names, but I'm pretty sure you're aware of that.
Yeah.
And Judaism itself is part of the greater mystery schools. Like you got symbolism and cultures across the board, like from the Nile valleys to West Africa. Like my landlady is a Beta Israel woman who was born in Ethiopia, raised in Israel. Now she lives over here. So, I've had that firsthand experience myself, and the books are all the same.
Right. Well, Beta Israel is a community that was consciously, openly a practicing Jewish community all the way from the time, possibly as far back as Solomon, but certainly as far back as Jesus and that era, right up till today. And that a large number of them have immigrated to Israel. Some have immigrated to the United States and other countries.
I live with one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and then I study under different scholars, like Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, who was world famous as well as controversial for the time. But for what it was worth, like I always had that Pan-African Jewish education. And, actually the Jewish culture, as is written in the Talmud, goes back to the agricultural society. So I'm wondering myself, this is just mercantile ethics at play. And that's what spiritualism, in my opinion, evolved from, because it's very specific in books like the Torah and the Talmud, about, different practices that one must have, because before the university system became prevalent, like we think that universities always were what they are in America, but that's the furthest thing from the truth. That was more of an elite situation. Even in Europe, the mercantile class was basically the mainstream of people that was out making it, so to speak.
That's right. And I mean, the Talmudic Judaism is very practical. It talks about how to conduct business relationships, personal relationships, relationships between nations and communities, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. I mean, it gets very much into detail. It derives from the Torah. It's not as high a level spiritually as the Torah itself, but it still, continues this guide toward what God had in mind for all of us and the blueprint for how to live.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, because it's like one example where I trace my tribe to is like, you know, if you just want to go all the way back, my genealogy is basically on the Nile valleys and somewhere in what they call the kingdom of Kush, the Kushite culture, which is modern Sudan. And the bottom line is this: it's like there's no deviation, like, you know, like Yisro, like the great prophet Moshe Rabbeinu, like it's he helped organize the first government that was in place. Like,
exactly.
You know, like, so you that's what I wanted to elaborate on. And so yeah, it shouldn't be. It's a no-brainer to people that's in the know like us, because, you know, just to stamp out the racial component is that the first mikvah in Europe was in Italy, and it was Sephardic. So, you know, Jews have always mixed and mingled amongst themselves. So, like, even the Ashkenazic have Sephardic roots. And
of course. I mean, Jews are all over the world, and they're in China, they're in India, they're in Africa, they're, you know, in Latin America. I mean, you have, you know, it's a universal thing. It's and there is both a mercantile and also a diplomatic element to it, in that you know, the princes and the kings of Europe and of Asia, Jews were able to, like, serve them as diplomats and as bankers and as businessmen and as artisans and as administrators, because they developed skills that went beyond just living in that one little area. They could have connections to other communities in other countries and all over the world. So, you know, it's kind of like a group that has generally existed outside of government in a way, and has been basically depending on its own ability to take care of yourself and your family. So it developed a very strong ethics of family and education and sovereignty through property and other things that I think have really led to an example that created the United States, in my opinion.
Definitely. You know, Jews were actually a traveling society. You know, the initial disadvantages of non-property ownership in a lot of places allowed the Jewish community to have a greater worldview, because they were always in transition. So eventually, when there was no more places to go, you know, people started getting familiar. So, you know, one guy would be like, yeah, I might know somebody over here in the East or in the West or wherever else. And like a lot of people that's not in the community, or a lot of our critics, tend to overlook all those facts.
That's right.
You know, because it's only because of our disadvantages that we have any advantages, you know.
That's right, because you learn how to deal with adversity, and you learn how to deal with insecurity in many ways, because that's part of life, and you become more internally strong, more self-sufficient. So I want to bring things up to today a little bit, Yahuda, and ask you, what do you think of this most recent news phenomena, maybe, and I'm not sure it's anything new, but this whole business of critical race theory, and there's been a great outcry against it. I think particularly in the African American community, which are people are disgusted with it. It's creating like very stark and very kind of unnuanced categories based on race, and that people are this, that, and the other thing because of their race. And you know, to my way of thinking, it's not only in itself racist, but it's also very divisive. What do you think?
It is, and I agree with you. I'm appalled by it, because it's just a smoke screen like system, because basically the majority of racial issues, in my opinion, all stem from class denial. You know, like people can't access the class system, so they get bitter, they become angry, they start pointing fingers, and it's all classism. You know, whether you in the bottom of the class strata or in the middle or at the top, that's basically where I think it all comes in. And it's just, you have a lot of skilled manipulators who play on people's emotions and twist things to their own particular agenda.
Harvard Mean Girls.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the Harvard Mean Girls in Detroit, joke about them. But we got a lot of these very liberal women leftists that went to Harvard. Charles is right next to Harvard there.
That's right. And some of them are running the state of Michigan, I may add. I'm thinking of 3 in particular, but I don't know if we want to go into Michigan politics. I think you know who I mean.
Yeah, I got an idea.
Yeah. So we now have everyone embroiled in this critical race theory, which is predominantly run by kind of academic, predominantly white liberals, wealthy people, suburban people, who think they're going to foist some sort of social engineering program on the rest of us and create a new sort of a new dialectic, when they're really fanning the flames rather than de-emphasizing what are real. I mean, there are real conflicts and there is racial tension. That's not to be denied. But why? What, the approach shouldn't be to institutionalize it and federalize it and teach it and make it into a official thing, because it's not everyone identifies with this, both in terms of their race or think of others in that way.
Well, yeah, back to what I said, wrong people in power, because the biggest disservice that's done when you have people self-appointing themselves, what makes them qualified to
right?
To say what is and what isn't, and the majority of them, and it's really shocking to see how illiterate culturally they really are. They have kind of this, feel good, I don't know what they call it, but it's just not something that I'm willing to be a part of, because I know better.
It's a white savior complex, and it treats black people as if they're children. It's obnoxious. It's racist in the worst way. It's old-fashioned British colonial type of racism that black people, like white man's burden, and it's ignorant. It's wrong. It's not helping anyone.
Well, I would trace it. The Brits really were more early in casting out undesirables and abolishing slavery. I think it goes back to the South, about back to the Civil War, the Democratic South. That's
right. With their Klan.
Largely blamed for mediocrity, even to this day, because even in the North, you had people that were race driven, but it wasn't institutionalized like down there, because they were always in the habit of exploiting free labor, and they were anti-unionization.
Yeah.
And it got to a point where it spilled over, and we called it the Civil War.
That's right. And it's also why the South didn't advance as quickly as the North. They kept in these institutions of slavery and kind of plantation mindset that really created like a backward feudalistic mentality that I think is still out there, and it still hurts them. I guess that I want to invite Doovid back, but I want to ask you one more question.
Go ahead, feel free.
Why do you think so many, at least on the establishment level, but also in terms of numbers, why are so many both black people and Jews so liberal?
Because it was just the most successful thing, like when you have group dynamics, everybody telling you one thing, then people just adopt things. Like it's a sentiment attached to it where, like if mom was like this, then grandmother, it's generational.
It's tribal. Yeah. I know that's true in my family. My grandparents voted for FDR. So, they kind of, nobody questions this. It just becomes almost like, it's not something that's intellectual. It's just, it's part of what you do. I mean, my parents would never consider, like if they got a conservative newspaper, their hand would fall off if they touched it. It wouldn't consider anything other than liberal and left-leaning things. That had to be the only way. And I don't think they really understood why. It just made them feel like they were on the right side and they didn't have to do anything. They just were good people. It's very
right. Exactly. Like even at the university system, like I was held back. I was a decent student, fairly above average, but I could have did a lot better. But my refusal to embrace certain policies and attitudes led to me being like punished, so to speak, and they wouldn't allow me to join honors college and things like that, at my alma mater.
Oh, that's ridiculous. And I think it was also racist because they don't want to see a black man come up and be against this sort of official liberal narrative. Look what they did to try to do to Clarence Thomas. I mean, this is happening right now in New York with Eric Adams. I don't know if you're following this, but he's a liberal and he's a Democrat, but he's also not taking any money from George Soros. He's not condemning, BLM. He is supporting the police. He doesn't want to defund the police department. And so they've suddenly all of a sudden 135,000 fake votes show up out of nowhere. I mean, they can't have that. They can't have him in power. He's a threat to this, I guess you might even say, plantation mentality. Black people have to kind of march along.
Clarence Thomas is a little bit different, in my opinion, because I think a lot of these people have a problem with super achievement. Like, as long as you got a convenient problem, then they want to be the solution, and that's the recruitment campaign. Mm-hmm. But guys like me who basically are the lone wolves of the world, like I can survive and weather a storm by my own wits, so to speak. But, I just wish Clarence Thomas would have been a little bit more receptive to just a broader spectrum of thinking. And I think he's a very smart man. Yeah. He's been in his position for many years. I think it was a frame up with him and that woman.
Terrible.
And I just think that it drove him to that place that he's at, and I do understand the history of the Republican Party. It was the Whig Party first, reinvented in Jackson, Michigan, so people just are not we no longer agree to disagree. And that's the true American value, constitutionality. And it's a lot of things I don't agree with on both sides, but at the same token, what makes our country great is that we can express those opinions. I'm not here to condemn or recruit. I'm just here to base an opinion.
Yeah, that's how I do it. And you're doing you're very articulate in that way. So I feel hopeful when I hear you talk. And as someone who is a Jew who passes as white, like most of my fellow Jews, I don't have a lot of hope for the Jews in this country. I don't think they would. They're hopelessly, pickled into liberalism. They're not right. I mean, they're not going to change, and I'm not going to waste my time with them. But I have a lot of hope for Black people. I think Black people are more conservative traditionally. They are more family oriented. They're more church oriented. They're more business oriented. And I think that there's possibility there for real growth. What do you think? Do you think there's going to be a change? I think there already was in this last election, particularly among Black men who voted for Donald Trump, probably in numbers larger than we'll ever know, frankly. We don't need to talk about that because this is YouTube. But what do you think? Am I onto something there? Do you think that? Yeah,
I agree, because even the Africans to this day are more traditionally conservative because of the enterprising culture, and the family values, and it as it relates to the greater diaspora, people that's used to providing for self, achieving for self, don't want to go back to dependency. Because another thing, when you and I don't totally condemn social programming. I think it's needed for people that have special needs. You
need to have
elderly people and children and
a safety net. Yeah,
that can't fend for self. But at the same token, the level of humiliation that's involved in receiving any of those benefits is just not something I'm willing to put up with.
Yeah,
because they strip people of dignity.
They've destroyed. They've damaged the Black family. And it could have been done in a way that was more preserving of dignity. It could have been done locally with a combination of businesses and local governments. I mean, instead of turning this thing into a national big national program, which basically hurt, black families. It hurt the black man and moved him out of the house. It led to social ills that are unthinkable now. And, we were warned about this by a sociologist by the name of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who wrote a report in 1965 on this subject. And he was Assistant Secretary of Labor in the Johnson administration. And he said, the black family today is intact. The black marriage is intact. The black church is intact. It's actually more intact than the white family. And that these big programs are going to damage that family. And he was right. And liberalism has been destructive to the black community in this country. It's been destructive to black business, the black church, black education, black, entrepreneurialism. I mean, it's, they want to talk about racist policies and racism. I think we should hold a mirror up to liberalism and see what it's done. So anyway.
Charles, I agree with a whole lot of what you said because, anytime you quarantine people into mediocrity, then, you setting the stage. And I think that the whole concept of, like, even if you look outside of our community to the Middle East community, majority of Muslims that are educated in this country, I went to school with a lot of them, they lean towards conservatism.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even my accountant, a guy I've been knowing for many years in Dearborn, was an avid Trump supporter. I was like, you know what? You'll be a star if somebody gets you on camera.
Yeah, but he's not going to get on camera because the cameras are run by people who are not, for the most part. So,
but on the ground, boots on the ground, like, people just don't want these type of, like, certain influences creeping in, especially people that have families with children. Right. It's very, and I'm in the creative industry, so to speak.
Sure.
But at the same token, like, I serve a role as content creator, and I endorse and promote entrepreneurialism. And, it's just that it's a sad story when you take choice off the table and then you have another situation going on. And that's what has happened. And they keep all this tied to the system of reward and punishment because people who think different and step outside of the box are ostracized and punished for not going according to the social norm in those situations.
That's right. And I mean, I see it also as sort of it's a struggle not between like left and right, or it's certainly not a struggle of race. It's a struggle between the ruling class and regular people, working people, people like us, and that's what I think they're more afraid of than anything. And it's happening all over the world. It's not just in this country. It's happening in China.
That's always been true.
Yeah.
And as a creative myself, like, the creatives have always had a somewhat of a relationship with the ruling class, but I don't envy anyone that's of greater means than myself because I was taught different. And intellectually, I can relate to a lot of people and I get along with them. I can coexist. And I do know people that will be considered one percenters by today's standards, even though that narrative always changes, So, it's just all about your family history and culture and background that prepares you to deal with the world. And a lot of people just don't have a big world view. Even if being a person that don't have strong means, you can educate yourself, you can read. And I'm not even talking about formal education. If you know how to read and count, that's a great start.
Reading is key. And, learning how to read I've done a lot of programs on this with my friend, the late Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld, who wrote a whole shelf of books on this topic, how the establishment and the kind of the liberal, starting with John Dewey, they took phonics out of the schools where young people could actually learn how to read properly in English. And they replaced it with these phony look-say methods and whole reading methods, which created dissonance and dyslexia. And it was particularly damaging to minorities because, you had an erosion of family structure and you didn't have the ability to read properly, and it reduced the ability to read and to have literacy. and that reduces the ability to think and to have intellectual capacity and to have an imagination and to function as an independent, sovereign person. And that's exactly what John Dewey had in mind back in the early 20th century when he put this program in. He was a leftist, he was a socialist, and he wanted to turn America into a compliant, collectivized group of people. I mean, this is, again, my friend Sam Blumenfeld has written a ton of books on this topic. He passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. But his classic is NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education. So, Yahuda, talk about, just let my listeners and viewers know where they can watch your program or learn more about you and anything else, websites, anything you'd like to share.
Well, like I appear with Doovid a lot of times, but I'm more so behind the scenes. I endorse artists, work with them, like from a publisher's perspective. So, if you keep up with popular culture, you might see me every now and then in the headline, but I don't really have any formal websites. The name of my company is called Ahead of the Game Music LLC, which I'm registered with Broadcast Music Incorporated, but that's really about it. Like I'm more of a venture capitalist where I invest seed money into different projects that I believe in. And, hopefully one day, like I can be more of a big deal. And
part when Detroit was trying to recruit the movie industry here, he was a part of that, but it somewhat fell apart when they stopped giving the tax incentives to bring the movie industry here.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, so you're a movie and entertainment producer and marketer, or are you involved directly in that? Or?
Well, yeah, primarily I started off as a professional songwriter, and I, evolved into screenwriting. And as you probably already know, Charles, like those industries are more multifaceted. It's more up in the air, working directly for a major publishing house or a studio, then basically you just a hobbyist pretty much.
I know this personally. I mean, I'm a hobbyist doing this, and I have other jobs for money. But I mean, it's when you're in the creative world, you have to wear many hats to survive. So let me bring
Doovid wants to come back in.
Yeah, let me bring Doovid in.
I'm going to let you do the whole show with Yahuda, Charles, just because I don't have the setup for us to both hear. I wanted to mention, if you like talking with Yahuda, he right now doesn't have the equipment to do this on his own. He works out of the university. But you could do a regular show. I'll host him at my house. Like next week, me and you could come back. But yeah, if you enjoy talking with Yahuda, and want to do like semi-weekly or something like that,
absolutely, I'm open to that. Yeah,
until he gets the equipment to do it on his own.
Definitely open to that. Yeah, we could bring in a whole panel of experts.
I would have to figure out a way.
Oh, I'll be gladly supportive of you, Charles, because this is the type of thing that is fastly eroding in America. Great discourse, and how do people claim to be educated if they can't have proper discourse? Like, to tell you a little bit more about my background, I'm not the first generation of a college educated person in my family. I'm actually the third. My mom, my aunt was one of the first, for better words, Black nurses that graduated from Wayne State University in I think it was the late 50s, early 60s.
Right.
And, so education has always been prevalent in my world. My mother was kind of an atheist in a lot of ways, because it's like she knew her culture but rejected formal religion for whatever reason, but she had a big emphasis on education, and I'm sure you're familiar with that archetype, Charles.
Oh, I sure am. That about describes most Jews, actually, of course. But there's a revival both politically and spiritually among particularly younger people, and particularly people in our generation, and hopefully in the younger generation too. But it's inspiring to talk to you about that and to think about that. We should definitely do some more programming. I mean, doing the YouTube show, of course, it's amazing. Even though I've been shadow banned, I've been told the show still is growing, and you do what you can.
Yeah, that's all you can do. Because you know what? Eventually, the message will reach somebody.
Oh, yeah.
And, good quality content and factual points take you way further than all the other distractions that graphs that have critical mass immediately but just fall off later.
Absolutely. I believe that. And I think ultimately that does win the day. So anyways, Yahuda, I want to thank you for joining me today. I'm going to get going because I've learned that I download the show to Rumble and Mind and BitChute, and I've got all these others, and they won't accept it if it's too big. So I'm trying to, otherwise I'd go on for hours. And Doovid, thank you. And I'll talk to you guys next week and or the week after. I do this every Thursday with Doovid, and let's stay in touch.
Oh yes, he said that he was saying like goodbye because he's signing off.
Okay, yeah, great. Unfortunately, I didn't think of how to get this set up properly.
That's all right.
But I appreciate having Yahuda on. And as I said, like next week, hopefully we'll be back. And if you want to create a regular program with Yahuda, or even once every few weeks, till he gets his own studio set up, he's welcome to do it in my house.
Okay, then let's. By all means.
Appreciate that opportunity, Charles.
All right, guys. I'll talk to you next week. Have a good one. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Bye-bye. Have a great day, everybody. God bless.
Great. That was a great show.